how Allah made us to learn, and the interaction between the Ruh and the Nafs and the Qalb and the Aql. And by understanding the relationship of those four that go on within every child, you'll have a much better idea why children are doing what they are doing, and what kind of things you need to say to them, or what kind of situations you need to set up for them to help them progress in a right manner, both spiritually and academically. Our program is very much, in a way, the academics is secondary to our program, and the right spiritual development in Islam is our number one priority. But because of the nature of the program, the children automatically do very well academically. And we are starting our own small primary school just because we want to have a demonstration model, but not because we really want to get into school business, but we want to show how much can be done. And our prediction is that on the average of the classroom, the children will gain 2 years academically each year. Which, if we achieve that, of course, that would mean that by the time children are getting out of Standard 6, they would be about as knowledgeable as the children would be who are getting out of secondary school, out of Form 5 or 6. And this is because Allah has given us a brain that is so incredibly marvelous as a learning tool that much, much more is possible than we normally achieve. And because you're all teachers, I don't mean to be rude about the system that presently exists, but the educational system as it is not really designed to maximize the learning or to develop them, each individual, to the maximum of their potential. It's designed to give an average amount of learning to a lot of people. And I mean, one of the things that nobody really sort of often mentions in this particular way, but which is kind of obvious, because in a classroom there is a fairly wide range of how children, their abilities and their skills. Normally in a classroom, a teacher talks to the whole class at once. If you're talking to the whole class at once, statistically, 1/3 will not have a level of knowledge that they can really understand what you're talking about. 1/3 will be way beyond what you're talking about and don't need to hear it. And you're really only talking to the middle third. And then, so this means 2/3 are not getting what would be ideal for them. And additionally, those who, the school programs tend to just progress. I mean, each nation has a required curriculum for a year. So you put the children in a classroom for a year, and the teacher teaches all of the material in the curriculum. Each child in the room gets however much they get. Either they get it all or some get almost none. But they just move on to the next year, whether they got it or not. You see, really, I mean, I think it seems clear, in a right educational system, everybody learns everything. That should be the ideal. So we're setting up our school on a different educational basis. So that basically, to progress, everybody has to learn all of the material at 100% to be able to continue on. But we're not really here to talk about that part of it today, but I just wanted to say a little bit about the potential. And another thing about the potential of the individual human being, which is really, I think, quite amazing. For those of you who are parents, and probably most of you are parents, when your child is born, every child that has it is essentially born normal, within the normal ranges. In other words, they don't have some specific thing wrong, particularly with their brain. That child, when they are born, has the potential to do anything that the greatest achievements of any human being ever, your child comes into the world with the potential to do that much. Because although I see on TV there are ads claiming otherwise, basically all children come into the world with a brain that is, if there is no neurological problem, every child comes into the world with a brain that is much more than adequate to do everything they ever could need to do. See, nobody is born dumb. I mean, it's just physiologically, and also nobody is born a genius. I mean, that kind of thing just cannot get passed on genetically because of the nature of the DNA molecule. Certain things just cannot get passed on. So things like intelligence, they just cannot get passed on. So everybody has a brain that has enough neurons. Neurons are it's the name of the actual nerves of the brain. Everybody has a lot more than you need. One important thing, though, for particularly those of you working with young children, almost every human being has more or less the same number of neurons in their brain. The number being, don't sort of feel like this is an absolutely exact number, but roughly 100 billion neurons in the brain. So the average human being will have 100 billion. If you had 90 billion, you can do just as well as somebody with 100 billion, or if you had 110 billion. But what is important is the connections between the neurons. These are two neurons, but on the end of the neuron, there are lots of little what they are called dendrites. This is just an addition, really, to the talk I finally want to give you. I just wanted to tell you some things in the beginning about human potential. Dendrites are the connections between the neurons. The neurons do not directly connect with each other. And while everybody has the same number of neurons, not everybody has the same number of dendrite connections. And the more dendrite connections you have, it won't make you any smarter just because you have more, but it will give your brain the opportunity to transfer information around in your brain with greater ease. And so therefore, it might make learning a bit easier. And the number of dendrites, as I said, neurons are a fixed number. The dendrites are not a fixed number. Two things affect the number of dendrites that you have. And by the way, the number of dendrites might be anywhere from, I just drew several, but might be from 10,000 to 200,000 from each neuron. That many connections. So two things that affect this. One is nutrition before the child is born. And now I'm not a nutritionist, so I can't tell you exactly what the foods and chemicals that are necessary. But there are certain chemicals that if they are in the food that the mother eats, that can increase quite a bit the number of dendrites in the brain. But by the time you are teachers, the children already have as many dendrites as they're going to get through nutrition. But remember I said there are two ways you get more dendrites. The other way is by stimulation. And this is why it is absolutely critical from the time the children are really, as soon as they are born, to start giving them stimulation. And the more kinds of stimulation and the greater degree of stimulation you can give them, intellectual stimulation, physical stimulation, whatever kind of stimulation it is. Until the child is probably maybe 7 years old, there will be dendrites still growing, and they actually grow while you are stimulating the child, or the child is learning a task or something. And I've actually, they have technology now where they can do real-time observation of the neurons of the brain and the dendrites as a child is learning. And I've actually seen the dendrites as a child is learning a task coming out of the head of the neuron and joining with another neuron. So one of the things you really want to do as teachers is stimulate the child's body and mind as much as possible to get the maximum number of dendrites you can get. The first part of the talk is why the world is the way it is. And the reason why I can talk to you about the way the whole world is because the way the whole world is exactly the same as the way an individual is and the individual develops. So human society develops in the same way an individual develops. And I think all of us know that the problems of the world are so unbelievably severe right now that it would be fair to say the world is not a very nice place. And in all honesty, it doesn't look like it's going to be getting better soon, unless something is done. Now, many people think there is nothing that can be done, but there are definitely things that can be done. Also, many people don't think that it is possible to know why all the terrible things exist in the world. But when I show you why all the bad things exist in the world, you're going to say, this is so simple, so unbelievably simple and obvious that you almost think people could not have missed it. So I'll show you just a little bit how an individual develops. When a child comes into the world, this would represent, for example, we'll call it their consciousness. It could have different names, but we'll say their consciousness. And it is more or less blank. So we know in Islam that every child is born in a state of fitra, which is Islamic purity. But, and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did say that depending on the family the child grows up in, he might be Christian or Jewish or Sabian. And there's not many Sabians around anymore, but there are sun worshippers. But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was really saying much more than that. He was saying the environmental circumstances of the child are going to determine what the child becomes, not just religion. So while the child is born with a blank consciousness, through the process of growing up, messages are written into his consciousness, and they are constantly being written in there. They're written in there from three sources: physical environment, and the social environment, and for human beings, before they go into consciousness, they have to be perceived, so it has to go into perception. And for human beings, we have a third source, which is the whole key to the talk I'll be giving you today, which I call inner speech. And inner speech is the key to the fact that we are Khalifah of Allah, that we have free will. It gives us a means to resist negative influence and increase the effect of positive influence. And it is a way to cleanse the black spot from the heart and prepare the soul for purity on Judgment Day. The inner speech is a tool that Allah has given us that can do all those things. I'll explain how that works later. But right now we're just basically talking about how the child develops. So the child starts as this complete blank page, and messages are going to be written on that page. Now, Allah has told us that no moment can be the same as the one before. So that means no two moments can be the same. Just so everyone can see. If this is one moment, the next moment cannot be there at the same place. So that means there's only two places the next moment can be. Closer to Allah, closer to Shaitan. Right? Basically, goodness and evil. There's really nowhere else to go. Right? In every single instance, there is a movement in one of those two directions. So that means that there are only two kinds of messages that can be written in here. Good messages and bad messages. A message that takes you closer to Allah, or a message that takes you closer to Shaitan. There's no other possibility. So, we'll call them good and bad. So if somebody grows up, and I just put a few, but the number would be millions of messages written in here. And they are almost all bad with just a few good. At any given moment, this is called the total past learning history. So, at any given moment, who you are is the sum or the total of all of these influence, all of these messages that have been written in here. That is your total past learning history. And at any given moment, you are who you are. In the next moment, you will be somebody else, because no moment's the same as the one before. So if somebody has a whole lot of bad messages written in there, and not many good messages written in there, your total past learning history determines to some degree what you will think, although you have free will there. But it has a lot of influence on what you will say and what you will do. Basically, the messages written in there pretty much decide what you will do in life. So if we have a world like we have right now, it is full of wars and murder and robbery and rape and drug abuse and sales and pollution and corruption and personal unhappiness and really everything that is wrong and the number of things that are wrong in the world is just incredibly huge. The reason that those things happen is because in the minds of a large number of people in human society, more bad messages are written than good messages. I mean, if somebody goes out and feels okay to steal from others, that means as they develop, because they started out in a state of purity, that the messages that have been written into their consciousness somehow or other say to them, it is okay to go out and steal, or murder, or sell drugs, or whatever. For all of those things, so that's how the individual works. Society is made up of now 6 or 7 billion individuals. And so what we know is for every wrong behavior that takes place in the world, it takes place because of some individuals who had bad messages written into their consciousness. I mean, basically, it is impossible to have a world society like we have, writing the messages that it writes into the consciousness of the average human being across all of human society. and not have all of the terrible things we have happening in the world today. You see, so what I'm saying is, since it is the environment that we know that determines how the person will turn out and what they will do, if people end up doing wrong things, we know that there is an environment, and the main part of the environment that has the effect is the social environment. So basically, we know we have a society that is teaching people or writing messages in the consciousness of people that is telling them that all of those terrible things are okay to do, or they wouldn't be doing them. So that is the simple answer to why all these terrible problems exist in the world. We have a society that is training people to do all of those wrong things. I mean, nobody likes to talk about it that way, but that is the reality of what our society is doing. So people don't only learn in school, they learn in every aspect of their life. So since we have so many really terrible things happening in the world, that means that literally millions and millions of people in the whole human society are existing in places where the messages are being written into their consciousness that are so bad that we have a world that is as bad as it is today. So, I mean, I hope you see how obvious this is, right? And how you could see how this would be true if you want to fix all of the problems in the world. They're not sixes, they're G's. Good. All that we need to do is have a society that only writes good messages. And if you have a society that is only writing good messages, you're going to have people who only do good behaviors, because their total past learning history, which determines what behaviors they will do, is only going to have information from good messages. And this is actually the purpose of Islam that Allah has given us. If somebody were to grow up in a fully and truly Islamic society, there would be no bad messages written into their consciousness. They would come into a family that in every single way would be writing messages into the child's consciousness consistent with what Allah has said He wants. If they go outside the home, they go visit the neighbors or they go to the next village, all they see are people who are going to write those same messages that Allah wants written into our consciousness. Only goodness everywhere you go. And this is the whole purpose of Islam. That Islam is like a process of social engineering for the creation of a right society. So it's important really that children grow up not thinking that Islam is just a set of rights and wrongs and Allah has decided for us He wants us to do these things and He doesn't want us to do these other things. It's that Allah wants us to have a perfect society. I mean, that's the ideal of Islam, the creation of a perfect society. So these things that Allah tells us we should do and we should not do are not just preferences of Allah, but they are what will give us a society that is right in every way. And I won't go too much into the inner speech yet, but the inner speech, which is our thoughts to ourselves. You see, what I was talking about, the perfect Islamic society, in the social, and particularly the social aspects, everywhere you go, everyone would be living in a right Islamic manner. If people are living in a right Islamic manner, their effect on others, those who see them or those who they communicate with, will only be positive Islamic messages. But we have inner speech, which is basically, you can consider inner speech largely, but not only, our thought processes. So you can think anything you want. So, you know, you could say, well, yes, people are growing up in a society where everyone acts in a right Islamic manner and communicates in a right Islamic manner, but couldn't the people just think any bad thing they want to think? And then write bad messages in there themselves, even in a right Islamic society? And the answer is they wouldn't, because to a very large degree, your thoughts are determined by the messages that are written by society into your consciousness. And as an example, the way some, for example, young girls dress in the world today. Even Muslim girls. I'm not sure about Singapore, but in KL, this kind of thing happens. It would be possible in KL to see a Muslim girl wearing a miniskirt. It would be possible to see. For her to do that, she would have to, with her inner speech, have to think, I would like to wear a miniskirt. That would be cool. This is what I would like to do. Let's say, for instance, in Medina at the time of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, do you think any teenage girl there would the thought cross her mind to wear a miniskirt? See? Because she would live in a society that everybody she saw dressed in the right manner, everybody talked about dressing in the right manner, and in every other way, people were wanting to follow what Allah wants. So the thought would never arise in her mind of doing that thing. And so even our thoughts would be only positive thoughts if we had a right Islamic society. Now, I'll be honest, as a psychologist, I feel it would be easier if I didn't have to say to the world, the only right way of life is Islam. You know, it would be really much easier to promote a transformation to a right world if you could just say, you can be any religion you want or no religion. All you have to do is be a good person. But you can't say that, you see. There is only one system that is perfectly right and perfectly designed to create a right society, and that is Islam. So since we have no alternative, I mean, the reason I say it's unfortunate is because a lot of people don't want to hear that message. If all you had to say is, you know, you just have to have a society that writes good messages, a lot of people would accept that. But as soon as you start saying, what are the good messages, and you say the good messages are Islam, then there are a lot of people are not going to be happy with that. So that's going to make it more difficult. But even though it is difficult, this is really what we have to do, and this is why Allah has told us that really the obligation upon every Muslim is the creation of a fully and truly Islamic world. Because it's no good for just our Muslim Ummah to be really good and some of the rest of the world not. Because then they will harm us. We would not harm them, but they would harm us. So really, the only way to have a fully and truly good world is to have a fully and truly Islamic world. And there is no actual alternative. So children need to actually, as they're growing up, to be taught this also. They need to know the reason for Islam. So the simple answer to fixing all of the problems of the world is to create a right society, and a right society is a right Islamic society, so that we only write messages whenever a child is born. We can be sure that that child will grow up having only good messages written into their consciousness. As long as we have a society that is writing bad messages in through the consciousness of some of the people who are growing up in society, we will have all the terrible things that we have in society. So very specifically, you cannot have a society like we have without all of the problems that exist. The problems that exist in the world are an exact reflection of what comes back from what has been taught. So I hope everyone can see how that is quite clear. So then we want to talk then about more about this inner speech. But inner speech starts very early with the concept of Khalifa. Now remember what I said inner speech is. It is actually, inner speech is all of our inner talk to ourselves. But that inner talk does not only come from us. I mean, say for instance, we receive inspiration from Allah. This is within the realm of inner speech. Because Allah, if He wants to inspire us, has to inspire us through a language that we can understand. And so Allah gives us the ideas that are expressed in our inner speech. They don't come from us, they come from Allah. But most of what our inner speech is actually our thoughts. Just to be real specific so everyone knows what we're talking about when we talk about Khalifa. Because we have a reason for referring to what we do as the Khalifah Method. It is to give emphasis to Allah's plan for us as us being His Khalifa. And 3 or 4 years ago, I did a tour of 12 of the 14 states and territory of Malaysia, giving a talk about the scientific proof of the existence of God. And I took the opportunity while I was going around to ask a question that I had been wondering about, because as I had been, I didn't do the thing that was suggested I do earlier, which is introduce myself and my background a little bit. This might be an appropriate time to say that. I've been Muslim now for about 28 years. And before that, I was what you would call a scientific atheist. So I was a scientist who did not believe God existed. And I had 2 areas of science. My main area and all my degrees were in child and clinical psychology, but I also had a quite high level background in theoretical physics and nuclear electronics. And it became clear to me at some point in my life, 30 or more years ago, that the facts of modern science prove that God exists. In other words, if what modern science says is true, God must exist. And then in looking for a religion to belong to, I spent several years and looked very seriously at the different religions of the world. I mean, you know, actually living in like Catholic monasteries and talking with priests and Hindu ashrams and talking with the Hindus and Buddhist temples and talking with the Buddhist priests. And all of them, it was clear to me that I couldn't remain an objective scientist and believe in any of those religions. I almost didn't look at Islam, but when I did look at Islam, it became clear to me that Islam was a religion that was so not just right, but also logical and reasonable that an objective scientist could believe in it. And so then I became Muslim and then studied Islam more and more. And the more I studied, the more I saw that the perfection of the system of Islam is the right way of life. And before that, I had also been interested in creating and hoping to bring about a better world. And I worked for actually the U.S. government. I was a director of research for children's values education in the Office of Child Development, and a professor of child and clinical psychology, and chief psychologist with what's called the Head Start program, which is the largest preschool program in the world. There's 5 to 7 million children in the U.S. And I came up with more or less this idea, but with a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is, this is a very important one, that if you give any individual or social group two things, a positive, accurate, motivational worldview, and a good understanding of the laws of learning, that individual or social group would move naturally and unstoppably toward everything good and right. And I had several primary schools as a research laboratory and put this into practice, and it worked amazingly well. But that was without Islam. So I had the laws of learning knew them quite well, but I didn't know the positive, accurate worldview very well. And basically, I would say my 28 years as a Muslim now, and the studies I have made, is to develop that positive, accurate, motivational worldview in a way it can be given to children to have an impact on them. And this is where the concept of Khalifah comes in. When I was studying Islam and I looked at the concept of Khalifah, it seemed that the concept of Khalifah is the exact concept that should be bringing us toward a right world. But in talks I heard and in the writings in Islam, the concept of Khalifa, while essentially everybody knows they are Khalifa of Allah, there's very little mention of it. So in this survey that I did, when I did the tour of Malaysia, the first question was, and everyone was Muslim who came to the talks, how many of you know you're a Khalifa of Allah? 98, 99% raise their hand, yes. Second question, how many of you know what Allah has said are your responsibilities as His Khalifa? Maybe 5% raised their hands. But I think if they had to be specific, maybe they could not have raised their hands. But then the last question, how many of you in the past month have, in anything you have done, thought that you were doing it as Khalifa of Allah? It was 1/10 of 1%. So it is like the forgotten concept in Allah. In Islam. But scholars have said that second only to the concept of Tawheed in Islam, in importance is the concept of Khalifa. They have also said that Allah would not have created this whole giant universe if it were not to have somewhere to place His Khalifa. And perhaps most importantly, on Judgment Day, when we are judged on our actions, we are to be specifically judged on our actions as to how well we have carried out our role as Allah's Khalifa. Now, if we are not even thinking about that role, how likely are we to carry it out well? Not very likely. So, this is one reason for using the concept of Khalifa in raising children, to focus their consciousness on it. The other one is if you want to teach somebody something, they need to be motivated. When I was learning about the law, when I was actually first studying about the technical laws of learning, I took a class in experimental psychology where we were given a live chicken to do an experiment with. And what we were supposed to do was devise a quite complex task to teach the chicken with these laws of learning that we had studied. So I wanted my chicken to stand on its right foot only, its right leg only, keeping its left leg in the air, hop on its right foot in a full circle to the right, push a red button on the wall of the cage with its beak, still standing on one foot, bend over, have a bite of food out of a food tray as a reward, and then do it again. So you are all teachers. How many of you can teach a chicken to do that? Can any of you teach a chicken to do that? See, if you don't know the laws of learning, it is virtually impossible. Now, in your mind, take a guess at how long it might have taken me to teach the chicken to do that task. And the class was 4 months long. So you all have maybe a number in your mind. It took me less than 10 minutes. At which point I thought to myself, this is like a miracle. Then I thought, if I could teach an animal as dumb as a chicken to do this complex task in less than 10 minutes, why couldn't we use these same laws of learning to teach children as they grow up into adulthood in 18 or 20 years? Why couldn't we teach them to grow up to be good and decent human beings? So that is really where this idea came from. But that chicken that I was able to teach that task to in less than 10 minutes, that chicken had to be highly motivated. So how do you motivate a chicken? You whisper in its ear, it would be really nice, I'll appreciate it very much if you'll do what I ask. No. You start with a chicken that is hungry, because food is a very strong motivator. So you actually, if you weigh the chicken and find out what its natural weight is, then you don't let it eat until it is down to 80% of that weight. So it loses 20% of its weight, at which time it is a really, really hungry chicken. And a really hungry chicken is a highly motivated chicken. So motivation is absolutely critical if you want to teach somebody something, or if you want to influence somebody to do something. So the same thing is true with kids. We want to influence children to grow up to be good Muslims and successful academically. So how do we achieve that motivation? Well, you just starve them most of the time. Of course you can't do that, you see, and it would be terrible and terribly immoral thing to do. So we have to find a different motivator. And not only is it important that we know about being Khalifah of Allah so that we can know what our role is, what Allah really wants us to do, but to know what it means to be Khalifah of Allah can be very motivating to people. Because being Khalifah of Allah is the grandest, most wonderful role that could ever be given, the greatest honor that could be given. Allah in the physical universe has created billions and billions of different kinds of things, not like a billion ants. Ants are one kind of things. So Allah has created in the universe billions of different kinds of things. Out of all of those billions of different kinds of things, the only one that gets to be his Khalifa is the human being. And what it means to be Allah's Khalifa, the word translates into a very accurate English word, but other than Muslims, nobody who speaks English knows the word. It's so rare. The word is vicegerent. What vicegerent means is somebody who is chosen by the leader or the king to represent them. So you don't decide to be the king's vicegerent, or we don't decide to be Allah's Khalifa. Allah makes us into his Khalifa. And then the leader or the king decides what the Khalifa will do. So after you represent the leader or the king, you don't just do whatever you want. You do what the leader or the king wants you to do. And you don't do it from any power you have. You do it by the power that has been delegated or temporarily given you by the leader or the king. This is exactly the position we are in with Allah. Allah chose us to be his Khalifa. Allah has told us what he wants us to do as his Khalifa. And he has given us the power to do it. And when he gives us the power to do it, what he gives us is something truly, truly amazing. Something, it's so grand that I sometimes feel almost embarrassed to think that we have been given this. It is so huge that when Allah breathes his spirit into the child, when the child is still in the mother's womb, sometimes people say 120 days. We don't know for sure it's exactly 120, but 120 is a good enough number. Sometime around that period, when the child is still in the mother's womb, Allah breathes his spirit into the child. And this spirit is the ruh. And we don't talk in Islam all that much about what the spirit is. We just say the spirit is breathed. But when we consider what Allah gives us, this is what is so amazing. Allah places within us a God consciousness. It does not make us God, don't think I'm saying that, but places within us a consciousness of a God nature so that we can experience and relate to the world in a small way as God would. It is a way to, like the animals, they just go around and they have no consciousness of the world. But we have a consciousness of the world and an understanding of the world and an understanding of right and wrong, which is technically called God consciousness, to see the world in the way God could see the world. Additionally, so that we can carry out this amazing role as Khalifah of Allah, Allah gives us the use of some small number of His infinite number of attributes in some small degree of their power, sufficient for us to successfully carry out the role as Khalifah of Allah. So I mean, this is one of the things that is motivating sometimes to people to understand how really special we are. That Allah actually gives us a degree of God consciousness, the use of some of His attributes, and the use of some of His power, so that we can carry out the role of Khalifah of Allah. And nothing else in His creation gets this. I mean, this is like such a high honor. I often think that if I were looking for a job and I looked in a newspaper and I saw an ad for a job as Khalifah of Allah, I wouldn't be going down there saying, I'd like the job, how much does it pay? I'd be going down there saying, I want the job, how much do I have to pay to get it? I mean, it is just the most wonderful thing we can be given. We need to get that idea over to children so that they can be motivated. And also, I mentioned how really special we are. When you are teaching the children, it is very, very important for you to get over to them the idea of how special they are. You may have noticed that in the world, I don't know if you know how many Jewish people there are in the world, but there's probably not many more than 10 million Jewish people in the world. Maybe 15 million, but it's a relatively small number. But Jewish people, almost all of those 10 or 15 million Jewish people, they're almost all successful. And they have a huge amount of influence in the world. So the question is, how do the Jewish people get to be in that position? You know, is there something genetically superior to for Jewish people? Well, of course not. But the thing that Jewish people do with their children is from the time they are born, they teach them that they are special. They teach them they are the most special people in the world because they still believe that they are God's chosen people. So they raise the children with the expectation that they will be special and that they will have special powers and abilities and they will acquire knowledge very well and they have a special role in the world. Well, at the time of the coming of revelation through Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the role of the chosen people in the world was passed from the Jews to the Muslims. And it is the Muslim Ummah that is given now the responsibility as Allah's chosen people to bring the right way of life, Islam, to the world. And so, because raising children to understand how really special they are results in them having a motivation and doing better than they would otherwise. It is very important for us to raise our children to understand that they're very special nature. And just by understanding how special they are, they will do better in all things and they will be highly motivated. Then, as Allah's Khalifah, there are three specific responsibilities. Now, if you'll notice, Those three things actually cover everything we could possibly do. And that isn't the actual wording that the early scholars used. The early scholars said the three responsibilities as Allah's Khalifa are to perfect yourself, to perfect human society, and strange wording on the third one, to perfect the world of space and time. 1,200 years ago, scholars were referring to the responsibility of making the physical world good, to perfect the world of space and time. And this is the job that Allah has given us. Sometimes to very little children, see, most people don't know the word vicegerent. It's a fairly difficult word. Certainly children don't know that word. Sometimes people replace the word vicegerent with representative. We represent Allah on earth. But little children don't even understand the word representative. So what we do for little children is we say that you are Allah's helper. Now somebody could say, and have said to me, how can you say we are Allah's helper? Allah is all-powerful and Allah needs no help. Well, of course Allah needs no help. But Allah in His mercy allows us to help Him because for our spiritual advancement, we need to be His helper. He does not need us as His helper. We need to be His helper, and He allows us to be. And little children like to be Allah's helper. And also, when the children get a little older, I think until I show you something, you don't really understand how huge this role is. Make the physical world good. Do you know what the physical world represents? Is that our planet Earth? No, it is not our planet Earth. Usually in the Quran, when it is referred to the world, Allah is referring to the whole of His physical creation. Now, to give some idea, and like the scholars early said, to perfect the world of space and time. So this means essentially the whole universe. Now, if you go out at night and the sky is very clear, and you look up at the sky, you see a lot of stars. Does anyone have any idea how many stars you can see? If you actually take a picture and count them, you can see about 7,000 stars. And that sounds like one, you know, because our sun's a star, right? 7,000 stars, that sounds like a lot. But that is like nothing at all to how big the universe is. Do any of you know how many stars there are that we can see with instruments in the universe? The universe is much bigger than this, but I'll write on the board the number. This is how many stars. There are that many stars in the known universe, that many stars we can actually see out there with instruments. 10,000 billion billion. And that is a tiny bubble in a much larger universe, but that's just how much the laws of physics allow us to see. Now, sometimes when I'm talking to children that are a bit older, not in kindergarten, but in upper primary school and teenagers, they are often very interested in like science fiction stories and stories about spaceships and things like that. And I talk to them about something that is possible in the future of Islam. I can't say this will happen, only Allah knows what will happen. But given what we are told in Islam, this is within the range of possibility. Since our third responsibility was originally described as to perfect the world of space and time, and the world of space and time is all of this universe of 10,000 billion stars and more. I say that I say to them, if we can have a right Islamic world and we don't destroy ourselves and human society lasts long enough, we might see a future where there are Muslim starships and starship captains and crews, and they are going out through the universe and and going around to all these different stars and bringing Islam and maybe populating planets and making the whole universe perfect the way Allah wants it to be. Because Allah has a plan for His whole physical creation. The plan for Allah's physical creation is for it to be perfect in every aspect. So, at a certain point, up to a certain point, Allah takes total responsibility for making sure that perfection occurs. And then, after Allah makes Adam His Khalifa, and through Adam all of us, at that point, Allah gives to us the responsibility for the continuing perfection of the unfolding of His plan. So Allah has told us He's not going to make our society right for us, that we have to make it right for ourselves. And if we wait for Him to do it, it will never happen. But if we do what it takes to make it happen, He will guarantee us it will happen. Now, how did Allah make Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, to be His Khalifa? And Allah is very straightforward in the Quran about how He did it. But I have never read it anywhere other than in the Quran. People don't say anything about this. In Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 30, Allah tells the angels He's going to make a Khalifa on earth. And right after telling the angels He's going to make a Khalifa on earth, the same surah in ayat 31, it starts, and then Allah taught Adam the names of things. And teaching Adam the names of things is making him His Khalifa. Now, this does not mean, when it says Allah taught Adam the names of things, it does not mean Allah took Adam around and said, like, this is a whiteboard marker and this is a chair. This is not what this is referring to. What it is referring to is that Allah gave Adam a brain that was different than other brains, different than animal brains. And that the human brain, that Adam's brain, was able to put names on things and understand what those names mean. This is called having a symbolic language. So if I say the word door in English, the sound door is not a door, right? But you know what it means. It is a symbol, a verbal symbol representing a physical thing, a door. And that's what it means to have a symbolic language.